Dan Kelson here with another quick video. The bots are here, the new voice in your head, making your decisions and leading you where exactly? So as automation increases every day, more fears surface that bots are going to take our jobs. And while we wait for fully autonomous self-driving cars, we're already mindlessly compliant with what the GPS voice tells us to do. We are essentially human robots, obeying the almighty voice of the GPS. And while you may not be one of these 8 drivers, and there are many more who blindly followed their GPS into a lake or a wall or off a bridge, is GPS making us stupid? Is this robot, the GPS, doing too good a job? Exactly how much of our thinking is shut off when we use a GPS app? Let me tell you the story of the shock of switching apps. I was driving to work and my preferred GPS app, Waze, wasn't working at all. For several days, there was some sort of bug that they needed to fix. Of course, it's not like I didn't know how to get to work, but I liked the visibility that Waze provides into traffic. So I switched to Apple Maps as an alternative, and I hadn't used that one for years. While Apple Maps mostly sent me the same way as Waze, there's only so many ways that you can get between 2 points anyhow, it didn't bother to send me down some of the crazy roads that Waze would to shave off a couple minutes. And that made me realize suddenly that Waze was my digital driving boss. You might be familiar with the meme, all your base are belong to us. I hadn't realized just how blindly I was following their advice. Not always, but very typically. And maybe, in hindsight, all those side roads and shortcuts weren't really worth the hassle, even if it shaved off a few minutes in Boston's rush hour traffic, or most of the day traffic, as it turns out. And it also made me realize that while Waze usually provides a faster path, God help the poor buggers who've never driven in Boston before. They would never survive driving through some of the slimmest side streets, bad neighborhoods, insane lane switches, and rotaries. With all the rotaries, 3 to 5 lanes with seemingly random turning restrictions, Waze is actually a terrible tutor for surviving driving in Boston, if you don't know what you're doing. So let me give you an example. Apple Maps gives explicit guidance on which lanes to use. This happens to be exit 18, which connects to the Mass Ave connector if you're headed north on Route 93. So Apple Maps gives explicit guidance on which lanes to use. This happens to show Route 93 north, approaching exit 18, which is Mass Ave, and then a turn onto the Mass Ave connector to get into Back Bay. So if you can see, there are 4 lanes indicated in the left image. Those are the 4 lanes of Route 93 north. And there's a exit right before this, which actually is exit 20, that you do not want to take. It still gets you this to the right place, but through kind of confusing frontage road. And there is actually no exit 19, as it turns out. There's a big sign that you can see. Also very confusing to new drivers to the area. And then once you are off of exit 18, you have to take the Mass Ave connector, take a left. And this happens to show that both the left and middle lane can take a left turn. The middle lane can also go straight and get you back onto 93 if you sort of missed and got confused, which I could see happening a lot every day. And the far right lane has to go straight. So while Apple Maps gives explicit guidance on which lanes to use, here we show again the turn onto the Mass Ave connector. You can use 2 lanes, not just the far left lane, which you might assume otherwise. On the right, on a different day once Waze was working again, it shows that, yes, you need to take a left on Mass Ave connector. This is Waze, but you have no insight into the fact that you actually have 2 options for the lane change choice. So in a past video, I talked about context, content, context, and community. So if we bring this back to designing for context, even if a robot is telling you where to drive, is it really enough info? So just to refresh, here's the Venn diagram that I talked about in the previous video. It's the overlap, the experience that you want to create for potentially different users with very similar needs but different enough, overlaps between content, whatever it is that you're operating on, surfacing, showing to them, the context that they're using it in, whatever they're trying to do, and the community, what kind of user they are, what sort of larger buckets. And then right in the middle there is the experience that you're designing. So if we're going to hone the experience, the content is the same for 2 different kinds of users. It's the available roads. you can't drive on roads that don't exist. Well, you could try, but it's not wise. The community, on the top example, is a hardened Boston driver, somebody who's driven in Boston for a while and is familiar with the kind of insanity of some of the roads in Boston. And the context is wants traffic advice more than directions. For that, I would say that the best experience is probably Waze, between Waze and Apple Maps. I'm not saying it's the best period across every GPS that's ever existed, but in this example. Versus content, again, available roads. The user is a driver new to Boston, not aware of the strange things that happen on Massachusetts roads. The context, they want clear directions more than they want traffic advice, because they simply want to get where they're going. And if it takes a little longer, so be it. I would say for this example, the best experience would be Apple Maps. So I think it's kind of interesting that Waze and Apple Maps are conceptually the same. They're GPS apps, right? So how different are these really? But in real use, they serve some needs better than others. So as you're thinking about that, I'm curious, what ways are you using different UX for different users? Comment below. Much more coming in future days.